Welcome to The Nation. I'm Rachel Smalley. It's not often a public servant publicly criticises government policy, but this week the Environment Commissioner labelled the amended ETS Bill a failure. The bill would keep the ETS at its current settings, so that gives agriculture a reprieve until at least 2015. Dr Jan Wright says the decision is disappointing and it will come at a cost. She joins us now. Good morning, Dr Wright. Thank you for coming in this morning. Let's take this back a few steps first. When Labor first introduced the ETS, what was the intention back then?
The intention was to include all sectors in the bill and all of the greenhouse gases under the Kyoto Agreement. And it was supported across the House, actually, or largely supported across the House. And
there have been, there's been an amendment, there's another amendment now before the House. How would that seek to change what that first ETS looked like?
Well, the first amendments that happened did weaken this a lot, and in some cases there are good reasons for this. I don't underestimate the difficulty of what we were doing, but these last amendments, the bill that's making its way through Parliament now, just weaken it to the point of being a skeleton, nothing more than a skeleton, and I find this deeply disappointing.
So what industries are paying and what industries are getting a free ride then?
Well, the most carbon-intensive industries, the most highly emitting industries that are trade exposed, and for that reason is the reason given, they are only paying for 1/20th, 1 out of every 20 tonnes of the carbon emissions they produce. You and I at the pump are paying for 1 out of every 2, for example, and this is just trivialises it. It is ridiculous, 1 out of 20.
We did speak with Tim Grosser on this program earlier this year about this issue, the Climate Change Minister. Yeah. We spoke about agriculture and how it was being left out of this. He said, and I quote, "We don't want to put our premier export industry at a competitive disadvantage when no one else in the world is doing that." So he argues that if no one is imposing the cost on agriculture, then we shouldn't, because we're putting our farmers at a disadvantage globally.
Yes. Well, certainly New Zealand is in an interesting position because half of our greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture, which is unusual among developed countries. But I'm actually less concerned about agriculture than I am about these heavy industrial emitters, and that's because the agricultural gases are different. It is difficult. There are challenges there. What I don't like is them being left out indefinitely, which is what these latest amendments do. And there was to be a review period every 5 years with a panel set up. That is now gone. It's all at the minister's discretion. So weakened it away, nothing left. And we mustn't forget that this is about climate change, where we're seeing it pile up around the world. Even in New Zealand, we've got glaciers melting. We've got 1,800 homes at Kapiti, north of Wellington, who are now going to have the fact that their coastal properties in danger on their LIM reports. This is going to start biting home, and this ETS is our main weapon for fighting climate change, and as I said earlier, it's eviscerated.
So if agriculture isn't the industry that worries you the most, what is the industry that worries you?
As I say, I think agriculture should come in, but I don't have the same problem being generous to it. It is the carbon-intensive industries. I mean, it's actually things like the aluminium smelter, it's pulp and paper, it's so on. Some of these big ones, I can't list them all. But they are, it really is trivial. Brian Fallow, who's the economics writer in the Herald, recently estimated that these amendments would have those industries paying for a fraction of their carbon costs would amount to a fraction of 1% of their total turnover.
The government would argue, though, that it's going to cost jobs, and in this economic environment, that's just not something that the government is prepared to accept.
Well, I would argue that that if the government wishes to subsidise jobs, which effectively this is, when you let some people off most of their carbon payments, then you shouldn't be doing it through the sort of back route. They should be doing it for clear reasons, not indirectly. The cabinet paper that the government is basing this bill on actually calculates a net fiscal impact to the government of $330 million over the next 4 years, and that's money they have to find elsewhere. So yes, if you wish to subsidise jobs, if that is the real reason, that's fine. I have no problem with that, but not through this method.
It does ultimately, though, cost the man in the street or the woman in the street on both fronts. You know, either they'll pay higher taxes or potentially there's going to be job losses. So it does have an impact on everyone, doesn't it? Either way.
Well, we as individuals and households are paying half of our share. But no, in the long term, this is really about moving the economy to a low-carbon economy, which will make it much more resilient in the future as we move into a carbon-constrained world. Because although there isn't a binding international agreement in place after the end of this year, these talks are going on internationally. Other countries are doing things. It's not like everything's come to a halt.
We're locked then, I guess you could argue, in a scenario where we're supporting or promoting in some way sort of old, dirty technologies.
Absolutely.
How do you incentivise then, you know, the farmer in Waikato to actually take on board and think, yes, I'm prepared to add some cost to my business to do my bit for the environment? In this environment, in any environment, I just don't think that's going to happen. How do you incentivise people to take this on?
Well, obviously some businesses and quite a proportion of the farming community now are using the, you know, deliberately building on the Clean Green image and our Clean Green brand to sell specialty products overseas. So that market will grow. I mean, there is this group of businessmen in Auckland who work very hard, Pure Advantage, to do that. So there's all of that going on. But basically those incentives need to come across the economy, which is why the emissions trading scheme is so important, because what it does is make goods and services that emit lots of carbon dioxide a little bit more expensive to do, and others less so. So it is really about a slow incentivising across. It's
difficult though for people or industry to have faith in this because, you know, successive governments are moving this ETS scheme all the time. And I mean, what do you say, for example, to carbon foresters who've invested in this industry? Really, when you look at what's happened now with the amendments, what are they going to be doing now?
Well, I'm very concerned about forestry because expanding our forest estate was the big thing that we were doing in New Zealand, big thing we were able to do. I believe the government has broken faith with the carbon foresters. Recently I was in the Wairarapa and speaking, and someone came up to me and said, I planted a carbon forest and I would never do it again. Now I'm just stuck with the costs of monitoring its growth because it's worth so little. I was also told in one of the regions of the country where a council was going to do a lot of planting of unstable soil to prevent erosion, and they were able to do that because of the money they would get for the carbon that would be stored, and that would help with water quality, and now they're not.
You've talked though about the importance of the green economy and how that could potentially drive the country. At the same time, you've got a government that's investing in, you know, fossil fuels exploration and mining. Is that in the spirit of Kyoto?
Well, if we had a full emissions trading scheme, which was putting those incentives across the country, I would, and of course, obviously, ideally across the world, that is less of a concern. But I am dealing with some of those issues in the investigation in fracking, which we're working on at the moment in my office.
Well, you are looking at fracking at the moment. Are you taking into account, as part of your decision, the potential impact on climate change?
Well, Rachel, I can't divulge any secrets. When that report becomes public, which is not far off, I will be prepared to come back and talk about it.
Can you tell me then what some of the key issues or key factors you do consider when you look at this issue?
Well, we are looking at fracking from an environmental perspective primarily, all the environmental impacts, although there are a lot of other concerns people have.
And when is that report due out?
We have a date of the 27th of November.
All right. Very much appreciate your time. Dr Jan Wright, Environment Commissioner, appreciate your time. Thank you.